Welcome to the Tao of Pizza, where we feature top logistics leaders, entrepreneurs, and supply chain innovators and share their inspiring stories with a holistic twist.
Mark Hiddleson here, host of the Tao Pizza podcast, where we talk with top industry innovators in the warehousing, logistics, and supply chain business with a holistic twist. Before I introduce today's guest, I wanted to mention I had a great conversation with Vicky Dello Joyo in last week, and also Sal Fatine, who's a 50-year industry veteran in our industry. Both those podcasts are awesome. Check them out when you have a chance. Today, I have Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, Rise 25, who's done thousands of interviews with successful entrepreneurs and CEOs. And we flipped the script today, and he'll be interviewing me. Jeremy, good to see you.
Mark, thanks for having me. And if anyone's listening to any other past episodes of yours, they should. And then the ones that we've done together, if you listen to them, they're about the different archetypes and how can you use them in your life and your business. And so this is going to be one that is the integral transformative practice, specifically of the knight and the victim. And we'll explain what that is. How do you use it? Before we get to it, this episode is brought to you by Specialized Storage Solutions. And I know, Mark, anyone who knows you, you've been in this industry for decades at this point, and you provide industry-leading warehouse storage solutions. So anything that someone needs, if they have a question, if they need something, if you don't know it, you'll find someone who does. You'll find someone who can help. So if you need racks, shelving, carts, conveyors, mezzanines, design engineering, installations, inspections, repairs, anything, any of the above, call Mark and his team. They've been doing it for a long time. And sometimes people don't even realize that you actually help with permit acquisition services too. So you take a holistic approach to business because of the whole supply chain ecosystem. It needs everything to function properly. So to learn more, go to specialracks.com, or they can give you a call, 707-732-3892. You even decided to leave your personal email if listeners have questions. So markhiddleson@aol.com. So Mark, start us off with the integral transformative practice of the knight and victim.
Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for the that's a great, I like the way you do the commercial better than I do. I want to start having you to read it every time. It makes me, I want to call myself and ask a question. And that's kind of about, so the knight and the victim, and we've already done 6 of these. We've done the integral worldview and the clown and the Don Juan archetype and mission and vision, and integral speech of the messenger. And I mentioned Vicky. I wanted to give her a shout out. She is, when it comes to messengers, she's been one of the great, master teachers in my life. So I definitely want to make sure people check out that podcast. She really embodies that messenger archetype. And then action through the lens of the prostitute, the prostitute not being that we sell our bodies, but, sometimes we sell out for, making choices in the way we do things. And then the 5th was the economic, making money through the lens of what do we do? Oh, through the child. And so, yeah, in a lot of the ways, the child archetype in how you create value and how you make money and develop relationships. I found that being a child, because I found mentors over the years. So, and also child embraces the excitement and the curiosity. And that's a big part. And we went through a lot of different ways to develop your integral economy. And then the last one we did was integral effort, right? You don't want to burn yourself out. I mean, some people, I think working hard is a given. And but I think burnout and integrating the shadow, and the saboteur was the archetype. But that was kind of a perfect archetype for that integral effort, because a lot of times you can sabotage yourself by trying too hard, and burnout and not really valuing, downtime and seasons, and just a way to have balance and still achieve, your highest goals, most ambitious goals. And now we had to wait till 7 for the night, which if it was up to me, I would have told them all through the night in shining armor. That's what I'm admitting to right now. And these last few, the knight and the victim, it's 2 different archetypes, but I chose to have them both because they sort of, everybody plays the victim at some point in life because they're suffering. We all get our fair share, you know, but the victim can be a guide on the journey of creating our own personalized practice that keeps us focused on moment to moment what's really available to people or groups. And the knight and victim are related and complementary because the knight in shining armor needs a victim to rescue, and then the victim, the damsel in distress, needs one to save them. So they play off of each other. But also what's interesting is the shadow, and that's one of the things we talked about. Integral is not just the great things about being the knight in shining armor, but the shadow of the knight is similar to the victim. The shadow side is becoming a bully, and if you can think of, because some of my favorite examples is I've met people that they're super empowered. I don't want to, you mentioned we do the permit processing, but a lot of the times when I'm getting bullied, it's when you're working with somebody who's in a position of authority. And a lot of times, building departments, all the ones I deal with, they're beautiful. They've done this integral work already and they're practicing the stuff. But as a rule, sometimes when you're dealing with, public officials or anything, they have a complex. And I'm always thinking, man, this person was probably bullied in the locker room or at some point, and they were a victim, and now they're doing it to me. And it's also, I'll be honest with it, in having the knight as one of the archetypes that before I was doing any of this work, it's the one that I would kind of identify with just without really examining anything. It's like, yeah, well, I want to be, I want to be this savior. And the shadow side of that is being a bully. And it's been humbling for me to look at, times where I have embodied that bully archetype. So for me, integrating that is making sure that even when I have power in relationships and I can, like one thing I do, I don't go over people's heads. A lot of the people I work with in my business, I know their boss or have a personal relationship with their boss. And we can get into situations that really need to be worked out between us, and where there would be a tendency, and I've had my clients tell me of other companies who do this, and they say they're only going to talk to the highest level person that they know in the company, and they really don't want to deal with anyone else. I try to really make it a point, no matter who I'm dealing with, that I give them, sort of give them the upper hand, and not really play the victim role, but embody that, integrate that archetype as like, we're going to work this out. I'm not going to go over your head. And just other ways, I could be a bully and just try to integrate it.
One of the other episodes we did talk about, Mark, we talked about the 4 agreements. And I feel like when you recognize this victim, or if you're being bullied, what's interesting, your perspective is to not take it personally, which is one of the 4 agreements, and just recognize, well, maybe this is something that person is dealing with. And so it probably helps you handle it in more of an elegant fashion, I'm sure, if you recognize that, as opposed to taking it personally and then lashing back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's grace under pressure, because it's what's interesting is my natural thing is just like, just grab them and shake. But it's not, it's part of the practice is experiencing that and knowing it's real, and then choosing. And I'll do later in it, I'll tell you, I have a grace acronym. I love acronyms because it helps to remember. But the yeah, it's great. And it's humility too, because I've seen, like I said, sometimes it's embarrassing when I look back and I see the way I have acted in situations. So I want to limit that exposure and be, embody grace.
And part of this, when we think of the integral transformative practice, there's a transformational learning piece.
Which is, it's different. It's important, I think, to make that distinction. Really, this whole work and, looking at integral transformative practice, it's really the whole thing. It's as every single one of these practices is going through looking at your worldview, looking at your mission and vision, and being honest about, how it relates to our life and our experience. But transformational learning is different than informational learning, right? Like right now, there's access to tons of information. You could overwhelm yourself with the amount of information up, but transformation a lot of times happens with experience that alters the way you experience life. For me, some of the ones that just happened is like when my kids were born. There was no way I could be ready for, I've had people ask me, how did you know you're ready to have kids? And I'm like, well, I didn't. And even when I thought I did, the second they were born, there's this feeling, and it's a transformation in our whole. That experience alters the way you look at life and living and your connection to others, and even your connections to the environment. And when I talk about integral transformative practice, I really talk about deliberately creating situations where you can create those experiences for yourself and not just waiting for something to happen. And what these experiences do is that it helps you break free from just the way things wound up being. Like a lot of people you talk to say, well, I do this because my dad, my dad was an alcoholic, so I'm an alcoholic. So like that's just the way it turns out. Or I'm I've even worked with people in coaching situations where we're working on this specific work, and they'll still say, well, oh, that's because the way my relationship was my dad. So I just, anytime it's a person of authority, I just don't listen, or I won't do what they say. It's like, okay, that's the way things wound up being. Then you can create personal freedom, and the archetype is just one, tool that you can do this. And integral transformative practice, I mean, it includes deep self-reflection, questioning who you are, examining values, questioning assumptions. That's another one of the 4 agreements, right? Is don't make
Don't make assumptions.
Yeah. And so, invariably when you engage in these practices, it's transformational. And what I found is that, it fuels my creativity and capability with beyond what I thought is possible. I mean, when this podcast is one of the greatest examples. I mean, I went from 5 years ago being a podcaster denier, like it doesn't exist, to now I'm hosting a podcast, and it's a transformation because my experience of it and what I see, the possibility of it is completely different, and things are possible that I didn't even think possible before.
I know you've thought about and talked about 9 areas of integral transformative practice.
There are, and I want to get into the 9, and I gave you a list, and if you can just give me I'll follow the bouncing ball. There's a short story, and I want to make sure that this is a lot of the stuff. I took things I learned from other people and I integrated in. Integral transformative practice is something that I 100% ripped off from George Leonard and Michael Murphy in their book, The Life We're Given. So I think if anyone's interested in this, it's one of the best books I've read. I talked a little bit about it with the interview I did with Sean Phillips because he was familiar with their work. But The Life We're Given, I mean, it's just an amazing, roadmap. If you want to pursue this type of, self-led transformation, it's a great resource. And then I'm just going to share, for me, I've been doing it for about 20 years, and just some of the stories that came up for me. But the basics of integral transformative practice is, and it's really hard. So most people, until they're in college, or like I said, when I had kids, develop frameworks that you have for understanding life early in your life. And the idea is instead of settling on those, is to learn new frameworks and let them guide you, but never get so comfortable. And I've gone through periods in my life, even personally, there've been 10 years where I didn't adjust the framework of how I was looking at things, because it's just, we talked about in chapter 1, worldviews are notoriously sticky. I mean, you always take this human tendency to take information and bend it to fit the way you already look at things. And then if something doesn't fit, you just kind of throw it out, and integral transformative practice, requires you to identify and question what you've been taking for granted. And then, like I said before, it's a path that frees you from the limiting grip of the way you wound up being. So the first one is affirmations. And it makes me laugh because of the Stuart Smalley skit on Saturday Night Live. And I think we talked about this in Integral Speech, because one of the most important things is how you talk to yourself. And it's funny that early in my life, I was an athlete, student athlete, and I had coaches back then. The coaches talked to people differently. It was more of a, and I don't know if the people who listen to this podcast are probably old enough to remember Gomer Pyle, and he had a sergeant who was like, Gomer, it was always in his face, just and that's how I used to talk to myself. I still do. It's funny. It's like, what do you mean? Get up, pull yourself by the bootstrap. And Gomer, what are you doing? I think whoever created that show, that's like Gomer Pyle's alter ego. I think a lot of people are like that. My friends, athletes, I looked at them, they're like, oh yeah, you got to be hard on yourself. You got to be. So I think there's some of that, but the Stuart Smalley affirmation that I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. It was also in the book we've brought up a few times, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He talks about writing things down on like a 3x5 card, and there's ways to write affirmations. That you state things in the present tense. I'm a lean, 220-pound, physically fit person who's able to do the things I want to do to have fun. That's an example of an affirmation that I've written down over the years. I don't read it anymore, but you can make affirmations for a lot of different things in your life. One of my mentors actually had a shoebox full of 3x5 cards, and then they were rubber banded together. It was like different areas that he had created for business, for personal, and affirmations are just a way to sort of generate the results you want for your life, and you're not kicking your own ass, and that leads to a little bit of freedom. And the victim and bully is right there, right? In your self-talk, you can be a bully to yourself, you could be a victim to that voice, or you can have a healthy relationship. So
the next, I love the affirmations, because when times get tough or things aren't going exactly your way, you have that self-talk, positive self-talk that you could bring up. The next is cardio for kicks.
So cardio for kicks is, cardio. It is part of the original George Little, Michael Murphy practice, and I think it's important to get your heart rate up. And I say for kicks because, like, I know you're a basketball player, and one of the things we had a conversation off air one time that there is no shape like basketball shape. And when I coach kids, I always there was a question I asked at the beginning of every season, and some kids will remember it the most of the time. But I would ask them who invented basketball and why. And do you know who it is?
I mean, I'm going to guess James Naismith.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but
So he was a training elite people in the military, and then he invented a game that would challenge you with intense physical challenge that was similar to fighting, and then also the mental and the very fine motor skills and required, because it's even try catching a ball or anything. You can catch a ball. I can catch a ball pretty well. You get my heart rate up around 150, 160. The coordination is not the same. Concentration is not the same. It's like, I don't even about to die. Like a pass that you can catch standing still when you're in a dead run with somebody chasing you and trying to, it's like those reactions are different. And there's something about, chasing a ball and just the fine motor skills, the physical motor skills. I mean, there's so many different physical strength, because you got these big guys like me leaning on you. And it's a very intense. So when I say cardio for kicks, I mean, I love that. If you get me out on the treadmill and I'm watching something or whatever, it's one thing. But if you throw a ball and I have to run and chase it, I'm going to dig that much more deeper. It's going to be that much more meaningful of an experience. And I'm going to have more fun. And the other, I've got a good example of a cardio, two other things. One, I have a friend who's he's super Mr. Physical fit. And I'm like, I want to be fit enough to do the stuff I want to do. I want to snow ski. I want to water ski. I want to surf. I'm in my 50s. I want to be able to do it in my 60s, 70s, as long as I can. But he does these farmer carries with kettlebells, which farmer carries, you just carry weight. Like he'd carry it 50 yards. He'll like carry it 50 yards and then walk 100 yards without it and carry it. And I created this practice which combines that with the dedication of merit. So when I pick up those kettlebells, I'll be picking up a cause. Sometimes it's a friend who's going through something. They'll say, I'm carrying this heavy weight for my friend who's going through something. And then that kind of gives it a kick too, because you're not just doing it, you're not just carrying around, you're not just running in circles, you're actually lifting and carrying weight on behalf of, it could be anything. Sometimes I do it on behalf of homeless, sometimes it's for people who are hungry, sometimes for people who are suffering from depression, and just carry those weights for somebody else. And I included in my cardio for kicks. And then cycling is another one, because we do an event every year, the Cycling for Sight, and another event that's Levi's Gran Fondo, where we do a cycling race that you have to train for, but it's also the proceeds benefits a group. And Cycle for Sight, it's Wounded Warriors and the blind. And then Levi Leppenheimer's Gran Fondo, it's all of that goes to fund at-risk youth, which I was an at-risk youth, and I joke that I'm an at-risk adult. That's why I do all these practices, because I'm an at-risk adult. So that's my cardio for kicks.
The next is strength training.
Yeah, so strength training is something that, when I kind of grew up in the era where it just became popular, and I actually didn't embrace it in high school. And I noticed, I've always been a bigger guy, always had, kind of good muscles just naturally. And we did a lot of body weight stuff in PE. We had a great PE teacher who was actually an ex-military guy, and we did like astronaut body weight exercises. And I thought, this is all you really need is body weight training. And I noticed, like, my junior and senior year, other schools had started to get a strength training program. I started looking at all these guys that I was stronger, as a sophomore, I was way stronger than just, and then my junior and senior year is like, wow, these guys have been lifting, they've actually physically passed. And so that kind of piqued my interest, but it wasn't until I started studying Sean Phillips' work and Strength for Life, and that, lifting and strength training, you're building resistance, and there's so much the changes that happens in your brain when you lift heavy things. And I think it's natural. I think it's natural for humans to develop the capacity, whether, however it evolved, for creating shelter, or, being able to defend yourself as a tribe. And he had a podcast. Sean Phillips had a podcast one time. It was an old one. He had a military guy that was talking about the stress of being in combat in Iraq. And he said, one of the things he goes, what do you do to decompress, when you come back, and avoiding, you have to deal with all the stuff you've seen out there. And he goes, you know what, man? He goes, I go to the gym, because his quote was, he goes, sometimes it just feels good to lift heavy shit. And so for me, that's been my go-to. And it was part of the George Leonard, Michael Murphy strength training. I didn't make this stuff up, but it's another one of those counterintuitive things. And it also has to do with the knight and the bully. It's a lot of the people that I saw training when I was in high school. As a matter of fact, there was one guy ended up becoming a bodybuilder. He was somebody who kind of got teased in the locker room because he was super buff. It was like really buff, but he was tiny. It was just like, there's some people who are born with that body, right? You just have rippling muscles. Well, our sophomore year, it was getting teased for being mini buff, but our junior year, it was ripped and doing protein shakes and everything else. It was like, now you can defend the fort. So
I feel like, those type of things, it gets you out of your head. If you're lifting stuff, if you're, at least for me, if I'm on the field playing something, I'm not thinking about what happened earlier today or yesterday. I'm almost forced to live in that moment and just play. If a ball's whizzing by your head, you're not, daydreaming. Typically, if you are, you're going to get hit. But
hit you in the face. I have been in the face. It hurts.
But I get that. The next is Qigong.
Yeah, you said it. You said it perfectly. It's qigong, and there's a million different ways to say it. And I just interviewed Vicky Del Joyo, who I mentioned. She is a qigong master. She says it qigong. I've been saying it qigong, but the other thing about strengthening, I'll say this. See, my youngest son is 19, and for the past 3 years, he and I have trained together almost every day. That is something I really hadn't planned on. When he was younger, I was always trying to get him in the gym. I kind of gave up on it. And then, one day, I think it was halfway through his junior year or something, there's a gym in my office, and I usually train 5 or 6 days a week, or I'll be honest, 3 or 4. But since with Drake, it's gone to 5 or 6. And it went from me trying to get him in the gym. Now he's my motivation. And I mean, there isn't anything I would trade for those hours. Like we really rarely, we don't even say anything usually. It's just like, and put some dimes on there or whatever. And we listen to his music. I let him choreograph the music because that's different, than what I like. And I like his stuff. But the qigong or qigong, it's qi is a Chinese word for energy, and the kata is what I put in there. And the kata is really it's the basis for integral transformative practice, and it's something that George Leonard, Michael Murphy, they created. It's a series of katas, like a martial arts practice that you go through on your own. And so it's but qigong, and I just learned this from Vicky from my uh, interview with her, is that qigong isn't really one specific thing. It's a word that they invented in like 1950 something to sort of name thousands of practice. And she said there's some debate about this, and I don't know. I'm not an expert on it. I mean, she's in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, and so I'm going to go with what her version of it is. That Tai Chi would be considered a form of qigong. So qigong is kind of like a word like dance, and there could be interpretive dance and classical dance and all these different kinds of dance. Qigong is kind of the same concept, and that it's practices that connect the heavens, which is is beyond you, to the physical body, and it's grounded in the earth. And another way of saying it is like your intentions, your breath, and the movement as a basis for transformative practice. So there's a lot of another one that I practice with Wendy Palmer with Aikido, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's a moving practice. It's a centering, and the grace. I was going to take credit for the grace acronym too, and I just realized that's in the book, The Life We're Given too, and I've just remembered it. I've been doing it all these years. I claimed it for myself, so I'll claim it for myself. But the grace is GRACE, and the G is for grounding. And it's really, grounding is feeling the weight of gravity, your connection to the earth, and just, when you experience the weight and the pull and your connection to the earth, and that we're energetically, we're connected to the earth, kind of just like a tree. We're getting energy from the earth. We're getting all of our nourishment and everything, I think of where your food comes from. And so grounding is just sort of that weight of gravity. The R is for relaxation. And the relaxation, because basically it starts from head to toe. You can relax your jaw, your shoulders, your arms, and it's a relaxation. The A is for an awareness. So the awareness, you just become more aware of the physical energy around your body, not just in your body, but around your body. But it's just an intensified awareness. The C is for centering, and that everybody has a center, and the center, I think I talked about this on one of the first or second ones we did, is that having a centering practice and asking yourself, is your energy balanced in the front and the back? Because in Western civilization, I think basically anywhere, I think it's pretty much, all cultures, we have a tendency to focus on the energy in front of us because that's what we can see. We don't have eyes in the back of your head. I guess you can imagine if you have some animals have it, or they can see behind them. But I think it's a good practice because you do have this energy field behind you. And so you can, how it happened to me the other day. I can sense someone's looking at you or somebody's standing behind you, get like chills. And then it happened to me the other day. It was luckily it turned out to be my sister-in-law, but there's this energy centeredness in that you can she almost burned my house down one time. I should tell I should tell that story about my sister-in-law. We can say I'll do that when we talk about cultivating relationships or staying current. But the C is centering, and it's an important part. It's before you start the kata, which is about, and I will put on the show notes. I'll have the kata, which is a series of qigong exercise, and so it's a little bit of qigong, it's a little bit of yoga, it's a little bit of aikido because George Leonard was a master aikido practitioner. But it's the E is energize, and you energize yourself through your breath, and then the grounding, the relaxation, the awareness, and the centering is all that energize your entire being, and then really open yourself to the process of connecting to the heavens, your physical body, and earth. So that's the GRACE acronym. And if you got anything from this whole episode, the GRACE acronym, it's kind of a cool thing that you can do on your own.
The next mark is journal.
So journaling is a practice that I started actually when my daughter was born. I already had a son. I was expecting another son because we had a cardio. What do you call the car? It's not a cardio. It's a sonogram where they tell you, and the lady goes, "Well, do you want to know the sex?" And my wife said no, and I said, "Yeah, sure, of course we want to know." And she said, "Well, it's going to be a boy." So for 5 or 6 months, I'm thinking, boy, I've already had names picked out and everything. And my wife's like, she could be wrong. She could be wrong. I was like, oh, come on, she's 20 years, Queen of the Valley veteran. Like, this gal knows what she's talking about. And sure enough, I delivered my daughter because that's one of the things I like to do. And I was looking for everything, not seeing everything that I was expecting. There was a transformation for me. I mean, in my life, when I think back to some of the moments, and it was like, wow, you're going to be the father of a daughter. And it was just something opened up in me that I had access to that I never even knew it was a possibility of a way of being, and to be a father of a daughter. And immediately I started keeping a journal, because I did like this is different. And I knew journaling was kind of a good idea. And I was seeing it was like, well, I'll do it if I feel like. And probably 10 or 12 years later, I have a friend, I call him Kozlowski. His real name is Walensky, but he's Rob Zwolinsky, and I'm going to have him on the podcast soon. He is he was going to Wharton at the time, or just graduated from Wharton Business School. He's a super smart guy. And we had we would train together sometimes lifting, but we always got together like once a quarter for just like a catch up lunch. And he said some funny things because he was working in pharmacy. He's heavily in pharmaceuticals and building a company to sell. And there's a lot of effort and everything that goes into, flying all over the country and doing all this stuff. And he's like, because, once we get all this and we build a company, we sell the company, like things are going to be way better. And we were at a restaurant sitting by the river in Napa Valley in like the fall or something. I'm looking around. I'm like, yeah, because this sucks. So I was just talking about practices, and I said, journaling is something that I really get a lot out of. And I go, lately I haven't. And I notice it that, and he goes, yeah, well, and I go, I haven't had time. And he goes, yeah, man, yeah, it's hard to, everybody's busy. It's hard to find time and everything. He goes, whenever you journal, he goes, how long do you usually do it? And I go, oh, like 5 to 7 minutes. And then I'm like, as I said it, I'm thinking, who doesn't have 5 to 7 minutes for a journaling practice? It makes such a huge difference. So I'm not 100% on anything. I'll admit that. And my journaling practice is it's evolved into all different kinds of things. I mean, I have a family journal where I kind of keep track of some of that stuff. I started with my daughter. I've got a personal journal, business. I mean, but I just have different places where I write things down. It's the S in my space time paradigm audit. Start with a sketch and that writing things down. There's just something so powerful about writing things down. Even just it gets it out of your head. If you're stressed out about something, write it down. If you want to create something, write it down. And then there's something about that writing process that just it's another transformative practice. So, and then you can go back and read them later, which I haven't done a lot of, but every once in a while I have some journals that I'll just leave lying around. My kids get a hold of it and then they'll get it and they'll go, okay, and they'll start reading. And it's fun. And you'll remember stuff and go, oh yeah, I remember why I wrote that. I remember what I was going through. So
I love that.
That's Kozlowski's contribution. And every time I get out of the habit of, if anything, that a lot of meditations I do are 5 to 7 minutes. Like, well, I don't have time. I don't have time.
No excuse, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The next one is staying current.
Yeah. So this is one that it's important. And what it means is in relationships, whenever, if you're in a relationship, shit's going to happen. You're either that or you're not doing anything. And for me, what's really going on for me currently was thinking of sharing this is that I have these great masters that I work with. Vicky Delajoyo, Wendy Palmer is another one. And one of the first podcasts, or actually I was hosted by Greg Owens on the Watching Paint Dry podcast. And we had this amazing connection that just is a random coincidence. And I believe in coincidences, which means I don't believe in coincidences. And he'd practiced with Wendy for 25 years and actually personally knows George Leonard. He actually replaced George Leonard on the board of Integral Transformative Practice. It is like an organization that they set this up and you can do this in groups. And it was just an amazing connection. He invited me to a Zoom meeting with Wendy. And he said she hosts these and it's a certain day. And he sent me the link. And it was kind of the same 5 to 7 minute thing. And it wasn't 5 to 7 minutes. They're like a half hour to an hour. But I never logged in until I had this amazing interview with Vicky. And then I was like, you know what, Matt, now I've got momentum. I'm going to plug in. I'm going to do the Wendy thing on Tuesday. And when I plugged in, it was amazing, a group, but she's going through something right now. And I don't even know what it is, but it's a health issue. She's older but she wasn't on the call, and the whole call they were dedicating to her. And I felt like kind of like a moron, like, God, you've waited. And now it's, you missed it or whatever. But I practiced with that group of people, and there were like 6 or 7 people, and they did a lot of the stuff that they did as part of the kata or the qigong. They were doing these movements, and I was like, wow, she's influenced thousands of people with her work, and all the guilt that I had or anything just completely went away because I knew just from her practice and the type of person was what she would want me is to be right there where I was. Whether she was there or not, it didn't matter. Whether I said thank you for everything, like she's already touched thousands and thousands of lives. What she wants me to do is show up and do that practice. And one of the things I'm practicing with this group of people, and it had been years since I'd done it in a group with people. I mean, I do it on my own. Doing something in a group is much different. Like, I just had this amazing sense, like these are the kind of people who are going to solve the hard problems that we have today, because they're not just talking about it. They're embracing things in a healthy way. And now you have this person who have thousands of followers. There's some boundaries, right? Like you don't just want everybody calling saying, how are you doing? So for me, that staying current is just in relationships, and I was beating myself up a little bit for not being there. So I had to get I got current with myself basically and current with them. I was grateful to them that, hey, you guys are carrying this on. Like, I don't even really know what's going on, but I feel like I'm at home. These guys didn't even know me. I just showed up because Greg Owens invited me and he wasn't on the call. But, and I have to get current. So part of my getting current is that I'm going to call Greg and I have to share that story with him because he invited it to me 4 months late on the invitation. I missed it. And the part of that staying current is maybe he knows what's going on and maybe he doesn't, so it's not the victim or the bully or the knight in shining armor. I'm integrating that practice by and I don't, there's times where I don't want to. If you don't want to get current, it's like, well, it's icky. I don't want to go there because it doesn't feel right or I made a mistake or something. So staying current is like staying current in relationships on things like that, even when it's not a warm and fuzzy.
The next mark is gratitude practice.
So I already talked a little bit about that. I mean, I have a few different gratitude practices I do. I mean, one is just getting in the habit of saying thank you every time anybody does anything. The more you can express gratitude, like they're never going to be too like, oh, it's too much gratitude. No one's ever said, hey, you know what, you're laying a little bit too thick with the thank yous. So, but I have one that I love that I do every week is I just have the margin. I have this saying that life happens in the margin of my planner. I just start jotting down every week. I usually start on Monday. If it gets to like Tuesday or Wednesday, I haven't done it. I just start listing out. And sometimes it's people, my family always makes the cut, but it's simple stuff. My pencils, I'm thankful that I have a phone. I'm thankful that, for just minor stuff. But the most important part of my gratitude practice, and I think this is what makes it transformational, is I'm grateful for the shit that comes up in my life, because owning that, and goes back to not being a victim. It's the shit is the compost. So the bad things that happen to you, the experiences, and then that's what a lot of transformational experiences that, that's not that you didn't ask for. It's accidents, it's a death in the family, it's a lost relationship, or something that's disappointed. But it's a practice for me. Is like, how can I be grateful for this? How can I compost it into something positive? And if you want to know the science, there's tons of people that are doing science on gratitude practice. And there's if for people who really want to study the science of it, Andrew Huberman is doing work on gratitude practice, and he's looking at where they've actually done randomly critically controlled studies. I mean, mine is all anecdotal, right? I heard that it was a good idea, so I've been doing it for 20 years. I've found the weeks when I look back and it's crappier, those are the crappier weeks. So it's 100% anecdotal, but it's part of the ITP. And I love doing it, especially for the stuff that you wouldn't naturally be grateful for, but find a way for doing that. And then I'll say one more thing. I've had coaching clients that I've worked with in the past that say there's a difference in looking at the world as life is happening to you, or life is happening for you. It's like it's a different worldview. It's a different framework to look at. And I've had people who have been, there's, and I want to be honest about this. I mean, there's people with depression, or, they've been victimized, and there's people that I love, respect, and know. And they go, no, I can't look at, it's hard. It's almost impossible for me to look at it like that. So, the gratitude practice is, it can be a really healing place, but I'm not just assuming anybody is going to start there. I'm not in any way. I'm not making an assumption.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing. I think there's also books that guide you, like the 5-minute journal, I think it's called, that just help guide you through it. So if you're not sure what to do, the next one is cultivating relationships.
So really, everything is relationships are everything. And so all of these, I call it an ecology of practice, just because it's like they all kind of go into one. I mean, staying current involves gratitude, and journaling is how you practice gratitude, by writing it down. But it's an ecology of practice of, I would say, I just wanted to list three things, and it's hard to pick three things in this category in cultivating relationships, but uh, generosity, compassion, and love, I think, are the things that if you're creating an ecology of practices with those things in mind, and with generosity, it's fun. There, the shadow side of generosity is uh, a lot of times in relationships, one of the natural things is to want to share advice. And they're like, oh, this is what you should do. And that's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying anybody should do this either. So that's one clarification I'll make. Have a relationship to my listeners is that, hey, if you want to do something, if you want to create transformation in your life, if you see opportunities to create more freedom when it comes to archetypes and not really just accepting just the way things turn out, it's a great invitation, and I've had a good experience on it. But I don't think it's any, I wouldn't say, well, everybody should do this. And I think generosity, sometimes you go overboard and you're generous with advice. I want to be careful that generosity is like generosity of heart, generosity of spirit means, am I showing up? Am I making those calls? Am I doing what it takes to stay current? And am I looking at compassion, meaning shared passion, right? Like I have my passion was not the same as other people, and I have aunts, um, and some of the people, you know, my master teachers, the people I love, the people I look like sisters in spirit, and all that. Really much different than they are if you started looking at the difference, whether it was sexual orientation or political or the way they look or the way they talk or anything. It's like you could focus on all these differences, but it's compassion is about the sameness. And then when you get down to it, when you're really in honest and authentic, and I think authenticity, it could add to this. When you're authentic, all you see is the sameness, and the difference is the difference is like 1%, and then this 99% same. Like, unlike you and I, we're kind of the same. You like to have a good time. You like to laugh. You want to build a business and still have fun. But there's a lot of people they're different, way different than me. So cultivating relationships, and then, but I'll also say, I think I said this on the last one, integral effort and victim, bully victim relationships, and this is compassion involves forgiveness. Like a lot of relationships, almost everybody, I've found this in my experience, almost everybody needs to forgive their parents for something. And unfortunately, you don't figure it out till you're like 40 something. And like you've been harboring this resentment of your dad because of this. And it's a blind spot. Really, most people aren't, they're not, because you're not walking around thinking that. But in this victim and the knight in shining armor, I could see that a lot of the reason why I was tried to be this knight in shining armor, and at times it was probably inappropriate, and or it's whatever it was in reaction to something where I felt victimized, in my childhood, and so part of it is having compassion, and life happens for you, not to you, and cultivating those relationships, and then it's also, and I always, this is the other thing about integral transformative practice. It's your relationship with yourself. And that's, I think, another blind spot is a lot of people don't realize that you have a relationship to yourself. And really, to have great relationships, you have to have a good relationship with yourself. But the other huge one is, I've done this in business. I mean, my whole business, it's so humbling when I think about all the relationships. Whenever I thought, somebody asked me, why did you start your company? And then I started to say all these things that had to do with my ego. And I was like, wait a minute. It was a complete group effort of things people said to me, support that I got, suggestions people made, great clients, great mentors, they were business relationships that were authentic, that people saw an opportunity or they wanted to see more for me. It was all of this generosity, compassion, love, all of that. It's way easier than personal relationships. Personal relationships are super hard. The parent-child relationships and cousins and brothers and sisters. It's one of the books we've talked about a lot of books on these, like How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Think and Grow Rich, and Seven Habits. But there was some advice I got from somewhere, and it was, sometimes you'll get more information from reading the classics. And what they meant by that was like the Greek classics, like Socrates or Sophocles, or some of the old, because a lot of the stories are the same in relationships and the patterns, energetic patterns, the archetypes. But it's also true. I read the book East of Eden by John Steinbeck, and I wanted to read it because it's about California in the 1900s, and he wrote it in like 1952, so it's written before I was born. But I love California. Like, I grew up here. I was born in the Central Valley. It's different because of like the farming and the community and the relationship. So I wanted to read it for that reason. But he does an amazing job. Like, the reason that is a great American novel is he deals with all this. So when you read that book and you see the father, I mean, really what the whole thing is, like 600 pages, and it's basically a translation, a beautiful translation of the story of Cain and Abel from the Bible, from Genesis. And that's why it's called the East of Eden, because it's like we're east, we're far. And I was laughing because I was like, yeah, I grew up like 37 miles northeast of East of Eden in the Central Valley. But he brings in like the cultural piece and being in California, and it was different. This was the promised land, right? Originally, America was the promised land, but then once you got here, it was like heading west. And California has always been this huge opportunity. And he just goes through. I mean, there's tons of archetype in there. The prostitute archetype is alive and well, because that's a big part of that. But the relationships between families, father and son, husband and wife, and all the different stories and the way he weaves it together in that book, it was amazing. And I had a personal connection because it's California. But I think anybody who reads that book, and 600 pages, it only took me a couple of weeks, because it's one of those ones you just can't put it down, because you want to find out what happens. It's such a great storyteller. So
Love it. So, on a broader scope, those are kind of cultivating relationships personally, but the next stage on a broader level is community development.
yeah, so I think, what do you do with all these skills? I mean, that's a big, so a big part of my work is how do you feel your passion projects? I mean, because it seems like there's tons of demands on your time. Everybody has an important problem that they want to solve. For me, like, one of the reasons what started out for this project is I wanted people to look at the way they deal with ecological crisis or social justice, and that really, when you have relationships and you've cultivated yourself and you've done this work, and it's what project can you get involved with to make a contribution, because none of it really matters unless you're making a difference in your community. And your community could be your family, it could be where you live, it could be a community that you identify with, whether it's a social justice issue or environmental. But you're generating this transformation is for a reason. And what it is to fuel, it's not just as a goal to have all this energy. It's to generate the fuel to be part of the solution, to actually be part of the solution of the problems we see. And I mean, I don't think there's not a short list of problems that need to be solved. And I think, people are concerned about it, and we're not alone. So, investing back in the community. Also, I draw a lot of, inspiration from community. So that's another thing that's humbling. Any project, whether it's Cycle for Sight or, Levi's Grand Fondo, we're also involved in something called Ag for Youth. I always get the coaching basketball, all the seasons, and not just basketball. I mean, I coach like 20 or 30 seasons of amateur sports of kids. And people are always appreciative, like, oh, you're volunteering your time is so important. And it is, but I've always gotten way more out of it. It's sometimes it's embarrassing. It's like, yeah, well, I'm looking for another project. Is there another team to coach or another project to lead? So really it's the purpose of of the joy in life really is to find your gifts and share your gifts with your community, to create something. And I think it helps uh personal health when you have your eyes are on focusing on something greater than yourself. It takes a lot of the pressure off. So community development, community involvement, practicing in a community. um, and that's what, like, those ITP communities, when I joined that on Tuesday night, I went in there. I mean, they've created a place where somebody, kind of a stranger off the street who hasn't been involved in it for 20 years, can step into a space and just immediately feel at home. So for me, I want to create. I'm hoping this podcast is a place like that where you can come and just go, oh, this is home. I can use this to fuel a project in my community. And you don't have to start something, but getting involved. Everybody needs help. Somebody, and a lot of it, the the work. Like when I was president of the Warehousing Education and Research Council, it was like this high position. It's like, what did it mean? It meant that you were scheduling restaurants, you were setting tables, you were passing out, and then you were printing name tags, you were doing registration, all this stuff that uh, you know, you just showing up 15 minutes early and staying 15 minutes late. It's the extra half hour a day to make a contribution.
You become a humble servant, I guess you could say. I know we're running short on time, but I did want to take some time and talk a little bit about the archetypal life cycle.
Okay. So there's a graphic, and I'm gonna have to think of the best way, but I'll share it. But the archetypal lifestyle, or it's basically a freedom matrix with the archetype. And your human potential is, and then there's reasons why the line is shaped like, but your human potential over when you're young and into your 20s, you're kind of stuck with your freedom because you don't have financial freedom, you can't own your parents, everything else it causes. But as you get older, that curve starts to get steeper. Even once my kids, and I'm kind of at that transitional stage, as kids start to move out, I'm going to have more freedom that I didn't have before. So really, personal freedom can go up and up and up and up. The potential, and that's like, and nobody lives in a vacuum where they're just going to hit this trajectory and their life is going to look like this. What it actually looks like, your lifeline is kind of this squiggly line that goes along. If you're trying to maximize or optimize your personal trajectory, your actual life is going to kind of zig and zag and swirl around this potential. And then the other parts of that, and these are important, down at the bottom part of that graph, there's your biological, or even you could call some type of called your reptilian brain, where um, it's your need for safety and sex and food and everything else, and that kind of physically in your life, it goes up and down, kind of, but in a straight line. And eventually, as you get older and older, all that stuff becomes less important and kind of goes down, even though your potential's still going up. So that's the red line, which is like your biological. You have these biological things that are going on with you, and a lot of times, if you get caught up in that and you're just pursuing life for pleasure, pursue these pleasures for your bodily things, like, well, I want to have sex with as many people as I can, I want to drink as much as I can, to party as much as I can, and chasing that, it's kind of the more you do it, there's a law of diminishing returns. It's not great. So the other line on that graph is the green line, which is the social and social cultural line. So in culture, things are always kind of going up and down throughout your life. I remember being young and everybody, there was this hostage situation when I was like 8 or 9, 10 years in Iran. And I remember being terrified. It's like, wait a minute, anybody can just jump on an airplane and grab people from America. I'm like, don't we have all these jets and airplanes and nuclear missiles, everything? We'll just go get them, right? But it lasted more than a year. And so we've gone through them recently, the same thing, but throughout life, there's kind of a roller coaster of whatever culture's doing. And that stuff's going to kind of go. And if you get caught up on that roller coaster, there's all these ups and downs. It's not, it's a reality, and it does affect you, and it's going to pull your line down. But you still, your potential is still really trending upward, if you're focused on what you can do over time. And so you don't get caught on the biological roller coaster, and you don't get caught on the socio roller coaster. And it actually, one of the reasons there's this could easily, it could be a 3-day, I think a 3-day or a 5-day workshop. You could generate the energy to kind of pull yourself, because those roller coasters, it's not like, oh, this roller coaster is just there. It's powerful. Your bodily urges is powerful. The urge to procreate, it's like one of the most powerful urges we have there, to eat whatever you want to eat, or, power, control, whatever you need to feel for safety. They're powerful forces, and not, so integral transformative practice is kind of taking you off the gravity, or getting you off that roller coaster of, either biological or sociological forces that act on your life, and have a trajectory that looks more like this. And then the last one is your physical capacity for change. That line, it's sloped like this. There's a reason that the line is sloped like this. It's like a what's the science where you do, it's like calculus or math. There's a reason that the curve is shaped. So your physical capacity, when you're younger, it's going up and up and up and up super fast. But then as you get older, it's, your physical, by the time you're 20 or 30, you're not getting stronger and more physically capable of change. And then,
unless you're like Tom Brady. Right?
I was just going to say, for most people in their 40s, it starts to crest. For me, I'm still waiting for it to crest.
or you, Tom Brady.
It was
yeah.
I want to be the Tom Brady of integral transformative practice. But that's a perfect example, is that there's a TB12 thing that I've heard of. Have you read any of that or anything? He's got a great stuff he's written on. It's like, why has he been able to go so long? And he has a really different approach to training. A lot, like, he doesn't do a lot of heavy weightlifting, and he does more strength, flexibility and functional training and things. There's some, but that's a perfect example. And I'm glad you brought up Tom Brady, because it saves me the lack of humility of saying that. When I say that, there's a natural tendency, and I think, it used to be in your 40s. I think it really, for everybody, it's kind of moving, with technology and health and everything, that it's need more in your 50s. And I see even people in their 60s, like Mark, I think his name is pronounced Sisson. Have you heard of him? He's he's not really a paleo
He's like
guy.
Primal Life, I think.
Primal Life, yeah. And Joe Ferris, who's on another episode on the podcast, he can talk. He really loves that. But that guy's in his 60s, I think, and he looks like I looked when I was 25. So, but that physical, it does. I mean, eventually, at some point, and then you're playing basketball still, right? And you're, to me, if you could play, as long as you can play basketball, you're 25, right? Your body's 25. But it eventually, even Tom Brady, even maybe Mark Hiddleson, it will start declining. And then pretty soon your physical goes below your actual optimal projection. And so the thing is to get started while you're young. And that's the main thing about the physicals, where these intersect. So I got long-winded on this, so we'll have to edit out the slow parts.
No, we keep it all in.
We keep it all
good. Yeah. No, but this is great, Mark. And I think people should check out other episodes of the podcast, especially the one on the archetypes and how it relates to business and life, and other interviews, and specialrex.com. And Mark, thanks so much for having me again.
Yeah, no, you've been great, Jeremy. I mean, this whole thing this is a series. This is the 7 or 8 part of what you looked at. It's you've been amazing. I appreciate your effort And thank you.
Look forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Tao of Pizza podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.